Harinama said, this is Miles over here. He'd like to get initiated. And so I was looking at him. I had not actually surrendered up to that point. Even though I had, intensely wanted to join, I had not surrendered. And so I looked at him and I said, what is your date of birth? Because I had been into astrology before that. The hippies used to call me Gandalf because I liked, magic and astrology and so on. And he looked at me and said, oh, astrology? You like? And he pointed at me. You like? I said, yes. Your date of birth? And he said very proudly, September 1st, 1896. And I said, and what time? 4 o'clock. And that was the exact moment I surrendered. That somehow left such an impression on me that I felt to myself that, well, what good is all this astrology? I still understand that. It is a Vedanga. Now, of course, I can verbalize my feelings. It's a Vedanga. It's a limb of the Veda. But by itself, it's useless, unless a limb is useless without the body. So I said, well, this is a great scholar, a great spiritual master, a very kind-hearted person who's accepting me. So let me accept him as my spiritual master, read his books, and forget about astrology, which I did. So that was the first time I met Srila Prabhupada. So the next day, we had the initiation ceremony. There was no fire sacrifice. I was the only one getting initiated, and Prabhupada would be leaving the day afterwards. But we had a nice Vyasasan for him, nice Jagannath deities in the temple. And I had those big blue beads that we had in those days. The same ones all the early devotees, Kirtananda, Hayagriva, they all had these big blue beads. And so anyways, he gave me my beads and said, your name is Patita Pavana. And I did not understand what he said. So when he was going out that day, I went over and stood right next to him. And I remember he was so short and yet so effusive. He filled the whole room with his brilliant light. And he said, your name means fallen deliverer. And I looked at him like, he said, fallen deliverer. So I asked Harinama how to spell it, and he said, well, I think your name is Patipama. And I said, you didn't write it down? So he said, well, why don't you write to Srila Prabhupada? He's in LA, and we'll find out what your name is. So Srila Prabhupada wrote back, my dear Patit Udaran, now, my dear Patit Pavan, now Patit Udaran. The meaning is practically the same. It was deliverer of fallen souls, and now it's uplifter of fallen souls, because there had been another devotee initiated, I think, in New York, Patita Pavan. He became Kitchen Petit to separate him from me because he was a good cook. But it's interesting that I had asked Srila Prabhupada about astrology the day before my initiation. And if you go through the list of nakshatras, there's 27 constellations within the 12 constellations. And each one of these vibrates to a certain syllable. And within Virgo, which is I was to find out later, my moon sign, Pa, Po, Pi, Pa. So he gave me a name. That's what they do in India. They name you according to your Rashi or your nakshatra. So he basically named me according to my Rashi without even knowing what my Rashi was. I mean, this is one of those things where Srila Prabhupada displays that sense of all-knowing that just leaves devotees flabbergasted. I was given Brahmin initiation. It was a very big initiation. I mean, Jayapataka was initiated first, and Gopal Krishna was initiated. And I remember Srila Prabhupada gave some very intimate lectures at this time because he was now returning to New York triumphantly. He had, struggled and started everything from New York. And now he's coming back. He's got, 10 temples or something, or 12 temples, 400 devotees at this point. So he told the story about how King Yudhisthira one day asked Krishna out of curiosity that, I was the king of the earth, my wife is the goddess of fortune, and I'm your friend, and now I have nothing. He compared himself to King Yudhisthira, how he had come to New York with $7, and now look, he's got 10 temples, and he's got several hundred devotees, and how when he had first met his spiritual master, his idea was that he was going to become a rich man. It had been predicted Prabhupada would be very rich. Of course, it came true, but in a Krishna-conscious way. But he said, by the will of Krishna, everything was taken away from him, and he came to America with $7. But now he was returning triumphantly. And the next day, he gave a lecture, which was very direct. It was like a continuation of the previous day, that he could do it, we could do it. And the lecture the next day was, he gave the example of a hot iron rod. As iron, what does it do? It's cold. But if you heat it, it basically becomes the same as fire. So he was saying, I expect all of you to become spiritual masters. It was expected. It was like an order. I mean, this really blows apart the Ritwik theory, that he expected us to simply represent him as Ritwiks or Pandits. He actually wanted us to become initiating gurus. Of course, that's no small task. Well, anyways, I remember at the initiation, I had brought my brother. I have a twin brother, and he was initiated Madhu Mangal Das, first initiation. Madhu Mangal, he was a character. One fellow had come and asked him about Yogananda. He was very blunt, and he told the fellow, Yogananda is crass nonsense. So the guy went to Prabhupada and said, he was shocked. He said, one of your disciples says Yogananda is crass nonsense. So Prabhupada says, if he says something I did not say, then he is nonsense. And that cooled it off. But anyways, now it's time for my Brahmin initiation. So I go up, and Srila Prabhupada, he shows me how to chant the mantra. And so I looked up at His Divine Grace, such a great spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. I mean, so overwhelmingly, so divine. I looked up at him and I said, let me be your devotee life after life. And there was like this rumbling from within, and I wasn't quite sure what I heard. It was like a volcano going off. He didn't even look at me. So I repeated it. And I realized what he had said. Bow down! Well, definitely, if that's all it takes to become your devotee life after life, I definitely will bow down. And then I think it was the next day I gave him these books that I had bound. And he was so pleased to see that his Bhagavatams were now like, he wrote me several letters about this, saying that, these books are, any gentleman would be proud to own these books, so nicely bound up with gold stamping, and he loved them very much. So when I gave him these books, he nodded, he said, yes, yes. Very nice, very nice. So I said, Srila Prabhupada, before I met you, I was crazy. And now I'm not crazy. He said, no, you are not crazy. Your brother, Madhu Mangal, he is crazy. And then he looked back at me again and he said, hey, you American boys and girls, yes, you are very nice. But he wouldn't stop looking at me. He started pointing. He said, yes, you are very nice. Then he said, and you are qualified. All glories to Patita Dadan. And I mean, this was a moment. This was a moment when it was just like lights and brilliance and transcendence. And I could not understand it at all. This is when, the pure devotee, spiritual master, releases just a bit of his glory. Usually he appears almost like us in a way. He would walk with us and chant with us, and he was always like just a little bit above us. But sometimes this window would open and you would realize exactly who you are dealing with. The direct representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is in front of you. And this was one of those very rare moments. After Srila Prabhupada met my mother, he asked me, "Where is your father?" I said, "Oh, they're divorced." So he said, "When the father has children and he remarries, then he is lost." Now, I didn't know what he meant, so I thought about that. I didn't say anything. What did he mean? Did he mean that the father, he is a lost personality? What he meant was he is lost to the first child, to the children of the first wife. He is lost to them. And so I came to the conclusion that's what he meant. My father is lost. I thought, well, big deal. Now I have Prabhupada, right? I have a father. I have a spiritual father. What can that other father give me? Absolutely nothing. Give me no guidance, no leadership. Prabhupada always said to respect them. They gave you the body. That's fine. But now I have a real father. So I think many, many devotees felt that way. There was this fellow on the sidewalk who would make newspaper headlines for tourists. You tell, Deborah's birthday, whatever you want. I said, "Look, my spiritual master is coming to town. Make one for my guru, will you?" He said, "Sure, for free." He did it for free. I thought, this is great. This guy is going back to Godhead. So he said, "What should I say?" I said, "All right, Krishna consciousness takes over the world. Might as well go for the jugular." He made it. So that day, Srila Prabhupada lands at the airport. If you ever see the pictures of that New York landing, there's some hand that says Channel 4. That's my hand. I seldom got close to Srila Prabhupada, but somebody said, "Hold the microphone." So that was my Vapu Seva. Famous picture. I think you'll see it in the Lilamrita volume and in the inset. Anyway, so I gave Prabhupada this headline: Krishna consciousness takes over the world. And Prabhupada, he started glowing. I'm telling you, he looks like the sun and moon combined when he started. When he was pleased, he was so thrilled. And he was pointing and saying, I couldn't hear. My hearing's never been that good, so I got close. And he was saying, "Who is printed? Who is printed?" And right away, I got a rock in my throat. I printed. But basically, Prabhupada was so magnanimous that the fact that I had printed even one, that would have been good. That's how magnanimous, our spiritual master is. He had his servant then was Aravinda. And Aravinda said, "It's a joke, Prabhupada, it's a joke." He couldn't see the humor in it. So Prabhupada said, "Think nothing of it." But as I heard from Gargamuni, poor Aravinda, the guy left and he came back and wanted to talk to Prabhupada one-on-one, and Prabhupada said to him, "It is good you have left. You are an enemy in our movement." Prabhupada never said that to anybody except this guy, which is really unfortunate for the poor guy. I remember he was giving darshan at that time. The next day he was upstairs. All the devotees are in the room there. So I had been out on Sankirtan. I collected a little money. I had bought a gold-plated cross pen for $12, which is what it cost. And I went in and I gave it to Srila Prabhupada. And he took it and he looked at it and said, "I have got," and he waved it. "You would like?" He offered it back to me. I said, "No, please keep it, Srila Prabhupada." And he started talking about sannyas, so I asked him if I could take sannyas, and he said, yes, you may take sannyas when you have no sex desire. He could always say no in the most gentle fashion. Well, there was one morning walk I recall. Dr. Patel was an omnipresent force. Dr. Patel, he used to argue with Prabhupada about, he would say that Prabhupada would tell him that I do not tell my disciples chant Prabhupada, Prabhupada. I would tell them to chant Krishna. So you should not tell them that in your group you chant this name Swami Narayan. They should be chanting Hare Krishna, not the name of Swami Narayan. And they would argue back and forth. So one day along the beach, there was a lady standing there. And she had this beautiful deity of Ganesh she was holding. So she walked up and showed it to Srila Prabhupada. And it was a gorgeous little, very, very beautifully done. So Prabhupada said, yes, these are the fruitive, the karmakandi, the people that pray for fruitive gain. They install the deity of Ganesh, and they worship and say, please, may I have this, give me that, give me this. And then when they get what they want, they take the deity and say, now get out! And they throw it to the ocean. And Prabhupada said, now get out! And then he started walking on. And the lady, she was very satisfied to hear that. And also, I could see her that she looked at the deity after that very fondly. Like, I will never reject this deity. I will now go home and worship this deity. She had a very great look of love, like she'd been enlightened. That was the benefit of meeting a pure devotee, even just for a moment. That your whole outlook becomes changed. And that lady certainly had a changed outlook after that. We went to Hyderabad, as I recall. It was sometime in '77. I think it was in the spring. And they had just gotten the Hyderabad farm. So Prabhupada was going to be there, so we drove over and got there that morning. We just arrived when Srila Prabhupada was taking a walk. And here comes Srila Prabhupada, and, devotees are around this tree. In India they have a platform underneath the tree, as I recall. And they put cement so people could sit under the shade of the tree. I forget what the name of that platform is. And devotees had eaten at this platform the day before, and they hadn't cleaned up. There were yellow stuck rice everywhere. And I had just arrived. Innocent, Your Honor. I had not eaten. Just like I didn't sign the contract in Edinburgh, right? So anyways, guilty by association. So Srila Prabhupada comes up, and he doesn't want to sit down because there's dirty rice. Why should the pure devotee, the spiritual master, whom we honor on par with God himself, sit on somebody's dirty remnant? So he starts saying, why isn't this clean? And devotees, they're just gaping. So I whipped out my trusty penknife and I start scraping up this rice. Suddenly there's silence everywhere. And it was like reminiscent of, I'm on the spot again. I'm scraping this rice and silence, and I look up. Prabhupada is just looking right at me. He said, what is that? Is that a knife? I said, huh? Is it a knife? I said, it's only a little knife, Srila Prabhupada. He said, yes. You can use it on your throat. But the thing is, here again, this is something that you have to have happen to you, because even though his voice was so angry and harsh, if you look in his eyes, they're as soft as a cow's. They're soft, gentle, loving. And with little things like this, he would actually capture you forever. He would do something whereby you could never forget him. And what does that mean? You have a better chance of going back to home, back to Godhead, by the grace of the pure devotee. But I think the reason is because, as Prabhupada said during that incident, that Brahmins use water to clean. So if you want something clean, you use water. Other than that, it's some lingering sin in my past life, which a spiritual master, out of his eternal kindness, is rooting out of me and pulling out. And I'm sure I'm a very hard devotee to deliver, so I require extreme measures. And because of that, I humbly bow down to the lotus feet of my spiritual master eternally and beg him to forgive me despite my impurities, to try to drag me a little closer to Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and I'll be a good boy from here on out. Srila Prabhupada was absolutely empowered to empower others to present this truth in this way. And so writing was very important to me. And I remember once I had a notebook like this. It was one of these composition books. And I wrote, like 30 or 40 poems to Prabhupada in it. And I gave it to him at Henry Street. And he took it. And he said, yes, poetic, this is a quality of a devotee. And then he actually took my book and he embraced it like this. And he started hugging this book. And then he looked at it, turned it upside down, and hugged it again. And he repeated that over and over again. And he left it right near his Vyasasana. It became a part of his permanent room there for quite some time. So this is how much Srila Prabhupada appreciates his work. So I see a lot of nice stuff coming out of Vrindavan. Our godbrother Pundarik Vidyanidhi and Bhanu Swami, they're producing books like that. Subhag Swami, Gaudiya Vaishnava literature. And really having us push on the movement in this way is Prabhupada's blessing upon us. So writing is very important. And Prabhupada is explaining his philosophy about, the human form of life and so on and what it's for. And so the what did they call them in those days? Moderators. The moderator says, so Swamiji, what if we don't want to take to your Krishna consciousness? So Srila Prabhupada said, then you can be cat or dog. And they said, well, thank you very much, Swamiji. Very nice. Let's go. Okay, that's the end of this interview. They just hustled them out. And Prabhupada was smiling from ear to ear while they were getting rid of him. So when they got downstairs, he turns to Mukunda and he says, so what did you think of my answer? So, Prabhupada drew a line. Which side of the line are you on? It wasn't about interfaith. He didn't go out and say, yes, we also have a religion like you have religion. No. If you want to have a religion, you live according to certain principles. No meat eating right away. Otherwise, in fact, I asked Prabhupada that question once about meat eating. It was at Bhaktivedanta Manor, and he very clearly told me. He answered, right to me. One of those days when I could get up the guts. He said, whatever animal you eat, you have to come back as that animal. Very clear, uncompromising. I remember the first Vyas Puja book that we did was 1969 New York. It was a small one. And I wrote a poem for Srila Prabhupada called To Prabhupada. Narayan right away puts it to music and sings it. He liked it. And Srila Prabhupada appreciated this poem. Let me see if I can remember it. Paramhansa of the nectar lake, didst thou thine own true love forsake, leaving his fragrant lotus breath to come to this world of birth and death? Or is this a helping hand you lend, while this world of matter you transcend? I am perplexed, please let it be known, if you have come here to take me home. My feeble memory cannot recall, did I once in anger slip and fall? If there is truth, then tell me where. From this I'll turn, go with you there. And tell me please of Vrindavan, the cowherd boy, the gentle one, who's known as Krishna, Nanda's son. To his abode I long to run. O Paramhansa of our land, I see in glory that you stand. 10,000 times a day I beg, let me thank you for your helping hand. They were building the World Trade Center at that time. Srila Prabhupada was especially unimpressed with this artificial nuts and bolts society that has gigantic skyscrapers and yet no means to maintain the people that live inside. So it was interesting, somebody said to him that, they're building the world's tallest buildings over there, Prabhupada. He said, they will all be destroyed, the World Trade Center. And in fact, astrologically, they were destroyed under the nakshatra that Prabhupada was born on, Mrigashirsha nakshatra. Prabhupada, he often revealed that he could see the future, but he did in kind of an oblique fashion. The favorite analogy of mine that he gave, which describes, our good fortune, is, the turtle under the water. He comes up once a year for air. And there's a piece of wood floating with a knothole in it. What are the odds that that turtle's head is going to go through that knothole? Those are the odds that you and I have encountered. Look how many millions of living entities there are. They don't even have a human form of life, and when they do, what are they going to do? They're going to go to Colonel Sanders. You and I are saved. We're actually saved from the ocean of birth and death. We've been delivered. There's no greater blessing that you could ever achieve in life than this. And this is because we have that rare good fortune. We have to cherish every moment of it. This is such a great opportunity for us here in the darkness of Kali Yuga.
Je anilo